Now, after going through all these things, one of the important things which a lot of people feel confused about is what is called as the Para-Hisian pacing. So that's why, as I promised, we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. And why? So what happens is this is a single pacing maneuver, but you can get almost 7 hours. How? What is that is? So that's why I have mentioned it over here. If the His-bond HB to the RB capture is nodal, yeah, and then over here, then similarly in the loss of his bundle to RB right bundle capture. So that is why I have tried to write it over here. So it's a single pacing maneuver, but the answers which you can get is 7 in fact. So what happens is whenever there is loss of his bundle to right bundle capture, you try to see on the atrial activation sequence. Is it identical? Is it different? If it is different, that is the only time you are going to think that both the accessory pathway and the AV nodal conduction is present. However, if the atrial activation sequence is identical, that is the time you will see for this SA, the local VA interval. If it is same and shorter HA interval, there is only accessory pathway. However, if the VA interval is longer and the same HA interval, the only AV node conduction is present. So that's why this is the summary, in fact. So this was a beautiful paper from the Hirao K. It came in circulation. I would really like you all to go through this in detail. So as I already said it, first of all, try to look for the loss of his bundle to RV right bundle capture. Then again look out for the atrial activation sequence. If it is different, both the accessory pathway and AV nodal conduction is present. However, if it is identical, look for the SA or the local VA intervals. If it is same and there is shorter HA, only accessory pathway. If it is same HA, only AV nodal conduction. I hope it is clear. So that's what we will try to show you in some of the examples over here in this. So which I was trying to show you. So this is the first example in which there is local atrial capture only. Yes. And then in this one, what is happening over here is there's loss of his bundle to right bundle capture. So similarly, then again look out for the atrial activation sequence. Is it different? If it is different, yes. Both the accessory pathway and AV nodal conduction is present. Similarly, if it is going to be identical, look for the septal A or the local VA interval. If it is same, only accessory pathway conduction is there. If it is longer, only AV nodal conduction is there, in fact. But as most of the common things has good points, similarly, they also have their limitations as well. What are the limitations of this? So the common limitations include you must rule out concomitant retrograde atrial activation. Similarly, the nodal response can be false produced if the septal accessory pathway has slower retrograde conduction than the AV node. And it is not reliable in the left free wall accessory pathway and accessory pathway with decremental property. In fact, fusion of response does occur if the retrograde conduction go through both the AV node and the septal accessory pathway. So as I have already said it, why you are trying to do this maneuver is because you're trying to see whether the accessory pathway is present or not. So what are the, let's try to give you a step-by-step approach. Step-by-step approaches. So what is happening over here? So I have already, to make it easier for you, I have written the comments over here because I know a lot of times someone, anyone I think, even me or anyone, some good minds as well can get confused. So what is happening over here? If you look carefully, so in the first one, you are able to capture the his and also the V. However, in this, if you look carefully, the his is a little bit far away. So in the second beat, you're not able to capture the his. You are able to capture only the V. Only the V is captured. And this is the other reason as well. If you look carefully over here, the VA interval, it is different, right? Similarly, even the VA, the pattern of activation also tends to change, in fact. So, what is happening is his to A timing is fixed, and the atrial sequence, although, is definitely unchanged. Yeah, if we look over here. So in this bit, what is happening is the his is somewhere far away, right? You are able to capture only the V. And then in the second beat, what is happening is we are able to capture both. The his also comes closer, and of course the V as well. So now, so what is happening in this one? So this we are able to capture his and V. So the his also comes closer, and the V of course as well, if you look carefully over here. And then in the second beat, what is happening over here? If you look carefully at this pattern of activation, I have tried to purposefully do it in 2 steps to make it easier. So the pattern of activation changes, right? So different patterns of activation, atrial pattern, it shows there are 2 ways to go from the V to the A. V to the A. So there are 2 ways how you can reach over here. Of course, those 2 ways are the accessory pathway and the AV node. Yeah? Okay. So that is why this is the fusion of the AV node and accessory pathway. However, this is more of the only AV node. So what are the pacing maneuvers? So pacing maneuvers, we all are aware. So what happens is you have to pace at the site of largest his detection with varying stimulus energy to achieve simultaneously his and the ventricular capture and ventricular capture alone. So there are 2 instances, okay? One is simultaneous his and ventricular capture and the ventricular capture alone. So I have already showed you so many examples. There should be no mistakes. I don't want any mistakes at all. And what do you try to observe? You try to observe is for the response. It is going to be considered as extra-nodal response when the retrograde atrial activation timing during the his bundle is the same as the ventricular capture without the his bundle capture. Do you understand? This is very important observation. This is the thing for which his bundle pacing is being done. So in fact, the response is going to be considered extranodal when the retrograde atrial activation time from the during the his bundle capture is the same as during the ventricular capture without the his bundle. Okay, and that is the time you call it as extranodal capture. So whenever you are trying to do this method, make sure there's good his without A, and you are pacing at the his catheter at the distal end at 600 milliseconds. So of course, you start to pace at 20 milliamps, okay, to ensure his capture with a narrow QRS. And then you gradually decrease the output until you lose his capture, and of course there's QRS widening as well. Yeah? Put it in mute, doctor. So this is what I was trying to tell you. So if you look carefully at the his and V capture, so this is a beautiful animation. So that is why if you are able to capture the his and V both, so that's why you will be getting a narrow QRS like this. Because, and similarly, when you try to decrease the output, you will be able to capture only the ventricle. So that is why you will be getting is a wide QRS. And what tends to happen for the nodal VA conduction? So in the nodal VA conduction, so as I had already said it, from the his to the A, and the other one, what is happening is the conduction is different, right? So let me try to show you, okay, so I have already showed you some theoretical things and all. So what is happening in the practical? So 2 things. For example, if we look carefully over here, The first one is a narrow beat, right? I think everyone can see. That's why it has been annotated well for a better understanding. And this one is a wider one. So in the narrow QRS, stim to his is 10 milliseconds. However, the wider one, stim to his is 70 milliseconds, right? Similarly, so in this, what is happening over here, you're able to capture the his. So you can see the his very well, right? The his is captured. In this, what is happening is there's loss of his capture because you can see the his over here. So in the first one, you're able to capture the his. The second one, you're not able to capture the his. Stim to his is, that's why in the first one is 10 milliseconds. In the second, which is wider beat, is 70 milliseconds. So in the first one, you're able to capture the his. Second one, his capture is lost. Now, further. So what else do you notice? So you notice is during the his capture, the earliest A is at the CS proximal beat. Do you all agree? Yeah? And then what happens is the stimulus to A should be measured, because this is a very important concept, from where to where you should measure. So it should be measured to the earliest atrial activation during the SVT, supraventricular tachycardia. So the stim to A over here is 120 milliseconds. Stim to A is 120 milliseconds. Stim to A over here is longer. It is 180 milliseconds. I hope it's really clear for everyone. So then what is happening is, because why there is increase in the SA interval? Because it is due to corresponding stim to his interval increase as well. So this is what tends to explain it. So what is happening is the pacing stimulus, which we notified it by S, in the left complex resulted in ventricular capture, and the his bundle RP capture, the right bundle capture, producing a relatively narrow QRS complex and early activation of the his bundle. And the HBRP capture was lost in the right complex, resulting in the widening of the QRS, which I already tried to emphasize. In fact, there's 16 millisecond increase in the SH interval from 10 to 70 milliseconds, which is also associated with a 60 millisecond increase in the SA interval from 120 to 180 milliseconds, right? Which again, we have marked it over here. And it is seen without any change in the retrograde atrial activation sequence. The constant HA interval, which is 110 milliseconds, and the atrial activation sequence indicates that retrograde conduction was dependent on his bundle activation and not on local ventricular activation, indicating a retrograde conduction exclusively over the AV node. I think everyone will agree for that. And earlier, the atrial activation in the proximal CS than in the his bundle electrogram suggests the retrograde conduction over the slow AV nodal pathway, right? So what is now happening over here? So this is again something we all should be careful. Yes, so this is again already as I annotated. This is a wide QRS, this is a narrow QRS, and then if we look carefully over here, it is earliest at the his A. Yeah, and in fact the SA is lengthening, but the A activation pattern didn't change. Did it change over here in both the times? Look carefully over here. So this is again another pacing maneuver, but what pacing instance which has been happening. So the his is already marked. His is a little bit far away. His gets enrol, and that is the other reason as well. The second beat is narrow, so the SA tends to lengthen, but without changing the pattern. Now, so what is happening over here is the HA constant and short, the HA interval, if you look carefully in both these instances. So what is happening is the pacing stimulus in the left complex did not produce HBR2 capture, which is reflected by the wide QRS complex and relatively late his bundle activation, yeah? So which we can see over here. The 45 milliseconds shortening in SH interval was matched by 45 millisecond shortening in the SA interval from 90 to 45 milliseconds without a change in the atrial activation sequence. The constant HA interval 35 milliseconds and atrial activation sequence indicate that retrograde conduction was dependent upon activation of the His bundle and not on the local ventricular myocardium. This represents retrograde conduction was via the fast AV nodal pathway, right? So this makes it clear. Now let's try to understand what is the concept for the extra-nodal VA conduction. So nodal we are able to understand, but what is extra-nodal? So this is a beautiful animation we're trying to show, and let me try to give you an example. For the paucity of time, I'll try to do it like this. So what is happening? As we can see, first of all, in the surface ECG, narrow, wide QRS. The earliest is over here. So HA interval, both the cases it is seen. Okay. Then what happens? Over here, there's no matter his capture or not. Yeah, you capture or not. This is the same. Yeah. So if you look carefully over here, this remains the same. So because although in the first one you were able to capture the his, but so yeah, you captured the his or not, but the SA interval remains the same. So what is happening over here? So what is happening is, oh, sorry. So what is happening is, despite the loss of his bundle capture, the stimulus to A interval and the retrograde atrial activation sequence remain constant. It indicates that a retrograde conduction was dependent on the timing of the ventricular activation and not on timing of the retrograde his activation. Thus, the presence of retrograde conducting septal pathway can be identified by a fixed V interval regardless of the his bundle capture. So, after having an understanding of all these things, what is the clinical usefulness? So, it is important. So, this pacing maneuver, as you could see, you are doing a pacing once, but you are able to have multiple applications or multiple clinical usefulness of this maneuver. So, you are able to document the complete relation of septal accessory pathway, not just before, but also after the energy application as well. And that is why, so what happens is the SE interval is unchanged by the bypass tract, or the SE length is equal to the nodal conduction. Do we have a doubt? Definitely not. So the increased SE interval is not equal to nodal conduction, and increased SE interval if bypass tract is not septal. So if you look now beautifully, this tracing, this is again beautiful, very nice example. Narrow, wide, no doubts, right? So what is happening over here is we can see the earliest is at the mid CS over here. Yeah, the A. So this is the like a bracketing phenomenon, but the earliest A is at the CS mid. And then if we look further carefully, then we can notice is the SA interval lengthens, but the local VA at CS does not change, right? It doesn't change. If you look over here, does it change? No, it remains constant. And in fact, the increase in the SA interval is due to what? Due to increase in the SV interval. Agreed? So, now let's try to put both those clinical scenarios together. So in this one, we are able to capture the his. So that is why we see the his Purkinje conduction over here. However, this, where's the his? So this is more of a septal myocardium capture. And that is why this is a muscle to muscle conduction. So which can be seen in the animation like this. Yeah. So what is happening is the His bundle to RB capture is present in the left complex, SH, which is 5 milliseconds, and lost in the right complex. The SH increased to 70 milliseconds with widening of the QRS complex. The retrograde atrial activation sequence is identical in both the complexes, with earliest atrial activation recorded from the coronary sinus, the CS, indicating a non-septal bypass tract is present, and loss of His bundle to RB capture was associated with a 25 millisecond increases SA from 155 to 180 milliseconds, caused by a 25 millisecond increase in SV at CS. The SV increase from 95 to 120 milliseconds, and the local V remain constant, of course, at the 60 milliseconds. Yeah, so which we can see it over here, which we have already marked it over here. And the SV interval in the His bundle ECG close to the Para-Hisian pacing site was unchanged. It didn't change at all, right? By the loss of HB-RB capture, indicating that the His Purkinje system was responsible for earlier activation of the ventricle, which is closer to the accessory pathway during the HB-RB capture, and the prolongation in the S to V in the CS, the mid CS, was due to the longer intraventricular conduction time without the aid of the Purkinje system. And if we should be carefully, when we look carefully over here, we can note that the decrease in the HA interval from 150 to 110 milliseconds without a change in the atrial activation sequence indicates that the AV node did not participate in the retrograde atrial activation during either the HB-RB capture or even non-capture as well. So let me try to show you again another beautiful animation with a ECG. Let's try to combine them up. So what is happening over here? The SA lengthens, but the HA shortens. And now what is happening in this case is SA lengthens, but HA shortens. And this is what is happening over here. Yeah? So what is happening over here if we look carefully? So we can see the earliest A is at the mapping catheter of the mid-septum. Yeah? No doubts for this? And then what is happening is there's change of activation sequence for the bypass tract, in fact. So now there's a concept what is called as fusion. So what is fusion? What is the fusion? So literally the fusion is happening due to the partly by the AV nodal conduction and partly by the bypass tract conduction. So during the fusion there's delay in the retrograde activation of His, which is the SH interval, and there's delay in the retrograde conduction time in the AV node, the HA interval, if you look in this animation over here. And the conduction time, the third, which is being represented over here, the conduction time between the Para-Hisian pacing site to the ventricular end of the bypass tract, which is reflected by the SVT interval. And then finally there is a delay in the retrograde conduction time over the bypass tract. So this is a beautiful example for that. So what is happening? So what are the three things which is happening over here? You all need to spend some more time, but for the paucity of time, I'll try to be a little bit quick. So what is happening is the first one is the right bundle branch block. The second one, if you look carefully, there's a, look at first of all at the surface, this is more of a narrow. The second one is a wide. So what is happening over here is intervals are already measured. So if you look carefully, the earliest over here is at the His bundle distal. Yeah, if we'll try to draw a perpendicular line over here. Similarly, for the wide QRS, both the His bundle distal and the distal CSPA are in fact early. Any doubts about it? So over here what is happening is The HA interval remains constant, which indicates the part of the atria is also activated, still activated by the AV node. Similarly, in this is the response is nodal versus the nodal plus bypass tract. You can read the explanation well written over here, I think. And then this is for the narrow versus the fusion. The white curves, the activation sequence is of course changing, which tends to indicate again in favor of the bypass tract. And the SA interval is remaining unchanged at the right atrial appendage area, again showing in the atria is the only one which is getting activated by the bypass tract. Go through all these things. So what I would really try to say is it's very important, and it's a great maneuver. Definitely we all should try to read and keep it in our mind whenever we are trying to do. I think these things we have already discussed about it, I think. And some, yeah. Thank you so much for the time and understanding.